So before I was doing this, I worked for 10 years at an internet retailer here in Austin, Texas. I actually started in the warehouse and in inbound customer service. And by the time I left, I worked my way up to VP, and we were actually talking about a path to CEO of that business at the time. And that's Living Direct, selling small appliances online. So the funny thing about that is I had always wanted to have my own business. And so when I spent 10 years with that other business, it was a little bit crazy to me going through that path. Of course, I had a very rapid rise there, but it still was crazy that I spent 10 years there. So what I did there is I just learned. I moved in all different areas of the company and learned everything that I possibly could about everything. And then after, like I said, 10 years, I took a look around and said, well, it's well past time for me to start on my own journey. So I actually went through a bit of a niche selection exercise. I looked at the things that so I decided that I needed to be passionate about whatever I was working in order to be the best in the world at whatever I was doing. So I took a look at what I was passionate about, ran a little niche selection exercise that I made up on my own, and really what spit out the other end is I wanted to either work in automatic wristwatches, which I'm pretty passionate about, or I was extremely passionate about the new movement of CrossFit. So functional fitness with a lot of gymnastics, calisthenics, Olympic lifting, and some weightlifting thrown in as well. So I took a look at those two different movements. And while wristwatches are definitely dying or a niche or a market that's on the down, on the trend down, automatic wristwatches are actually trending up within that market right now. And then I took a look at CrossFit, and CrossFit I thought was just poised for explosive growth. I'm a CrossFitter. I love doing the exercises. I love competing. So I looked at that and I said, well, what it really came down to was I figured that in order to start a equipment company that would target CrossFit, I would need an initial investment in the $2,000 to $3,000 range just to get my first products that I could then sell. Whereas if I was going to actually go into wristwatches, I figured I probably needed $50,000 to $100,000 to get that first product to sell. So when I took a look at 2 to 3 grand versus 50 to 100 grand, I went the 2 to 3 grand route. And to be honest, I'm extremely happy that that's the direction that I decided to go in now, because it's been very good to us. The functional fitness movement as a whole, and CrossFit as the largest subset of that movement, has been on this just huge, crazy growth curve, and we've been able to surf on top of that. But in addition to surfing on top of that growth curve, also take market share from some of the competitors in that market.
So you brought up a lot of amazing things, and I want to take a second and talk about a few of them. So how did you leave such a great job? I mean, that's a big thing, right? Like, I mean, that's a big deal to leave a job where you're on your path to CEO. So you weren't even at the bottom. I mean, you're talking
Right.
about you're at the top, you have full control over this other person's company, and yet you choose to kind of, after 10 years, so that's your comfort zone, you choose to entirely go out on your own. What was the trigger that enabled you to do that?
Ooh, okay. So it's an interesting question. I'm glad that you keyed in on that. So a lot of my friends, I've got an MBA. My undergrad is an RTF degree, so film degree essentially, but I do also have an MBA, and a lot of my B school friends were telling me that I was crazy at this time because I was almost, there at the dream. I mean, it wasn't a public company, it's a private company, but to be the CEO is something that a lot of my friends were saying, well, that's, the be all and end all. So, and then my wife also thinks I'm a little crazy, maybe more than a little. So what happened though was I did a lot of soul searching and looking inside myself. At the time, I was traveling to China 3 to 4 times a year and spending approximately 2 months a year in China. And I had a lot of time on long flights and on long train rides and things like that to just look inward and look inside myself. And what I realized was that I was never going to be world class where I was previously at that other company. Company is great. I've got tons of respect for those guys over there. But just looking inside myself, I knew that I wasn't passionate about the appliances that we were selling or the product that we were selling, and I wasn't especially passionate about being a CEO of someone else's company. And so I knew that I needed to take that entrepreneurial leap on my own. And then the other key component of it was I was 30 years old at the time. And that's another, milestone that a lot of people use for introspection. What have I done in my life so far? And so far, I built a lot of great things for someone else. And I wanted to see if I could do that myself and build something really great for myself and get some validation by, customers and by the marketplace. Am I really up to the challenge? So I looked at those two things. I had a lot of frank discussions with my wife, who, like I mentioned, that thinks I'm a little, even today, of course, thinks I'm a little crazy. And, she was in. So, I started a business on the side. That's something I hadn't mentioned before. Fringe Sport was started while I was working at Living Direct. And I ran it for about a year while I was working at this other company, kind of taking my lunch hours, evenings, weekends, mornings to get this thing off the road, or excuse me, off the ground. And we actually did $100,000 in revenue while I and my co-founder both had day jobs. And when it was just us two, just kind of doing stuff on the side. And when we saw that we had done $100,000 worth of revenue in 1 year, we thought, wow, there's really something here because we're not even dedicating, our full time to this. So if we actually decided to build this into something real, then it's got a really great chance of getting off the ground and being something remarkable.
So was the 100K in revenue really that kicker? Was it like kind of like the wake up call that maybe it was time to take a leap of faith forward and see what you could do with it?
So yes and no. It was actually not 100K in revenue. That was the tipping point. The tipping point was actually $25,000 in revenue. So on Black Friday in 2011, it was Black Friday in 2011, we hyped up this really big sale that we were going to have. And between Black Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then the Monday following, we did $25,000 worth of revenue in that 4-day period. And like I mentioned, for that year, we only did $100,000 in revenue. So we did 1/4 of our revenue in 1 weekend. And that weekend was the tipping point where we said, holy moly, if we can do $25,000 in a weekend, even understanding it's a weekend that consumers are naturally predisposed to be in the buying zone, so to speak, there's really something here. And that weekend was really the thing that kicked us into quitting our jobs and doing this full time.